everyone, Andrew here, and it's been a while. The last video that I put up was in February 2020. It is now January 2021, and yeah, I apologize about that. I wish I could just say, oh, it's all COVID's fault, and, the stuff that we're going through. The reality is, I just really didn't want to. Because if anything, I had more time to do this, and I tried. I came up with ideas. I've been trying to talk myself into recording a video since June, and I've had ideas that I've been kicking around for a while, but I haven't done anything. And instead, I've been playing a lot of video games and watching a lot of movies. And I made a decision pretty early into the year that because there were so few movies getting released in 2020, new released anyway, and I don't have a lot of those streaming services. I just got Netflix in the last month and a half, so it's like I didn't think that was kind of fair to the year and kind of fair to the movies. I figured instead of doing the top 5 best and worst films released in 2020, I would do the top 5 best and worst films I have seen in 2020 for the first time. And I felt this was a good thing to do because I have seen some real garbage. Just some of the worst films ever made. And normally I would just give you the first 5 and then do honorable mentions in the middle. I'm going to start with the honorable mentions because this is an idea of the types of movies that I've been seeing and how bad they got. So, I watched, and these are all films I saw for the first time this year. I watched Trolls 2, Plan 9 from Outer Space, the original worst film ever made, which isn't even the worst film made by that director, because I also watched a movie called Orgy of the Dead, which is his worst film. That is 1,000 times worse than Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's literally single white topless girl dance for 20 minutes, 2 people talk, new single white topless girl dances for 20 minutes. I watched Meet the Feebles and Bad Taste, which were made by Peter Jackson before he did The Frighteners and eventually Lord of the Rings. And my god, these are mind trip films, especially Meet the Feebles. Meet the Feebles is if the Sesame Street was on all of the drugs. And it's insane. And I almost did a whole thing just talking about how insane that film is. And I might still do that. If you're interested, let me know. I watched 2 horrors that I thought were so terrible in the first minute to 5 minutes. I had to turn them off, which were Chillerama and Night of Something Strange, which Night of Something Strange starts with necrophilia and is immediately followed by rape. No. F that, I'm out. I saw Slender Man, which was boring. Mother, which was also boring. I watched Leprechaun 4 in Space, or Ishtar, which, oh, yeah. I watched a film called The 50 Worst Films Ever Made. And it was just a documentary listing all of the worst films ever made. And it drove me nuts because it was a film made in 2013. And the most recent film that they had on that list was Ishtar from 1987. So missing all of most of the worst films ever made. I saw Miami Connection. I saw Samurai Cop, which actually I thought was okay. It was really kind of interesting. Just had some limitations, but they at least tried. I saw Hercules in New York with the original Arnold Schwarzenegger dialogue, not the dubbed voice that they did for the re-release, which he's fine in that film. The film itself is just terrible. Highlander 2, The Quickening. Easily one of the worst sequels ever made. It had nothing to do with the original. It's just batshit insane and terrible. Body Slam, Revenge of the Banana, which is a documentary about the underground wrestling movement in Seattle, and it's just so boring. It's just tedious and dull. Santa Conquers the Martians, which is supposed to be one of the worst Christmas films ever made. It is not, but it has its moments. I saw Playmobil the movie, which is as terrible as it sounds, and it's also a musical, and the music is god-awful. I watched a movie called R100, which is an Asian trippy film. It starts with a man going to a sex club, ends with a man pregnant in just his underwear with his naked child next to him taking pictures. Yeah. I saw A Talking Cats, which... Ugh. I saw Cool as Ice starring Vanilla Ice. Ugh, also terrible. I saw both versions of Left Behind, and I will say the Nicolas Cage version is a smidge better in my opinion, but that's just because it has Nicolas Cage and more money in it. I saw Movie 43, which I really, really did not want to watch. I was like, I tried not to watch anything that's just like, I know this is terrible, I have no desire to see this. Movie 43 is one of the two exceptions that I did, and it has exactly one good scene in it that's actually kind of funny and kind of interesting, and everything else is complete and utter dog crap. So, before we get into my actual top 5, I do want to give a little respect/disrespect to the films that did come out in 2020, and I will give you a really quick rundown of my top 5 worst films that were released in 2020. Number 5, Artemis Fowl. Honestly, I kind of don't think this film deserved to be here on the list, because it had potential and there was some stuff that did work, but it was bad enough that I felt it had to be on this list over other films that were probably way worse, such as Call of the Wild. But just because it had the potential and they chose to do every stupid thing they could to make it terrible, it's on the list. Number 4, Mulan. It's a beautifully made film, but its destruction of Mulan's character is just the worst. They took everything cool and interesting and good about her and made her generic Supergirl who's all-powerful as long as she remembers that she's all-powerful. I might change my opinion on this in later years, but for me, this is one of the worst live-action adaptations that Disney has done. The only thing I would say is worse is maybe Cinderella or Lion King. Number 3, The Last Thing He Wanted. For a movie that had such a good cast, because it had, Anne Hathaway, William Dafoe, and Ben Affleck, it is such a horribly tedious and slow film. I watched this with my family at the start of the year, and oh god, I would give anything to go back and not see it. It just was such a waste of our time in our life. Number 2, The Main Event. This is WWE's version of Like Mike or Rookie of the Year. Kid finds magical mask that stinks, but for some reason he puts it on his head and then gets super abilities and is a super wrestler and he wants to join the WWE. And none of this would happen in real life even if magic existed, because there's no way in hell WWE would ever hire an 8-year-old, let alone let them even audition. Because, quite frankly, the last thing WWE needs is a recreation of the mass transit incident. And number 1, Doolittle. I wanted this film to be good. I really liked Robert Downey. I wanted to see what he would do outside of the Iron Man mold. But I thought there could have been something to this. And there really isn't. There's terrible acting, terrible story, just absolutely awful performances from everybody. Robert Downey Jr. does this weird thing throughout the entire movie where he's covering up his lips while he talks. And I have a feeling he just didn't say anything and they just ADR'd his lines in later. And he's planned that ahead of time. The end of the movie is him, unplugging a dragon's intestines, and then the dragon farts on him. I've saved you 2 hours of your life. Never watch this crap. Anyway, let's move on to my top 5 worst films that I saw in 2020. So this one is a shared spot. I have 2 spots on here that are shared by films, where it's both have similar feelings, and I couldn't decide which of them was better. They were both terrible in about the same way. So my number 5 spot goes to Manos, Hand of Fate, and Birdemic, Shock and Terror. Both of these have one similar flaw that drives the entire movie down in the garbage, and that is the driving sequences. Manos, Hands of Fate starts with a 20-minute driving in pure silence sequence where none of the characters are really talking. They just drive around for 20 minutes. And Birdemic does that even worse, because Birdemic, the driving sequences, is at least a third of the film, if not half of the film. I watched both of these with riff tracks because I thought it was the only way I could stomach them, and I was correct. And for Demick, it's like they spent the entire time making fun of that, and it got to a point where you get towards the later half of the film, and they're just like, "Wait, you didn't show us the car merging into the traffic. How are we going to know it's not to do that? You've shown us every other time. How are we supposed to know?" And both films have other problems with this, but the fact that they're so long and the entirety of the film is just, ugh. Manos Hands Fate is a really insane, hard to follow story that is poorly acted, poorly done. It has one redeeming feature, and that is the manservant. It's the only redeeming thing in this because he's just so weird and so out there. He's just constantly moving, constantly shaking, walks funny. He is like, if the film had been built around him, this might have been a really great comedy, but otherwise it's just a super boring ass film. Um, with Birdemic, Shock, and Terror, you have even worse acting than Manos. Really simple script that's just insane. And then you have the worst special effects ever put to film. So bad that they are literally hilarious. They are hilarious because it's just like, geez, Louise, really? The birds flapping in one's... It's just... I totally understand why Birdemic has become one of these so bad it's good films, because there's so much to make fun of in this crap, but like, and I liked the riff tracks with it, but the film itself is absolutely garbage. And it's one of those things, like, I probably could have gotten my hands on Birdemic too, but I'm pretty sure that would be terrible in the worst sense, because like, at least Manos and Birdemic have people that like them because they're so bad they can be considered somewhat good. I mean, there's definitely stuff to make fun of with, but it's like, those are by accident. You don't make a good, bad film on purpose. Which kind of leads me into my number 4. So, I watched Samurai Cop this year, and I didn't think it was that bad. Like, it had bad wig, some odd acting choices, and a lot of this, that, and the other, but overall, it was actually a fairly decently put together film. I mean, it's not, for what is clearly a low-budget, independent-made film, it's actually kind of enjoyable, and I liked it. And then I watched its sequel, made some 15 plus years later, and my god, Samurai Cop 2 is absolute trash. Just because they're trying to recreate what they did in the first one and have it be a so bad it's good film. Again, you cannot do that on purpose. That is only something that ever happens by accident. And this is just cringe-worthy dialogue and acting. Just absolutely worse. This feels to me like what would happen if Tommy Wiseau tried to do The Room 2, but did it with the intention of making it a comedy this time. This is what this feels like. It's like, you can't make that work. It worked because you were trying to be serious the first time. Speaking of, Tommy Wiseau is the villain in this, and he is awful, and I hate him in this. Like, nobody can act in this film. There's naked women every 5 seconds, which is fine, but it's not interesting, and it's really, like, ugh. It's kind of the only thing the movie has going for it at all. The Hottie and the Naughty. This was the other film, much like movie 43, where I was like, I really don't want to watch this, I shouldn't watch this. But it was on, and I figured, oh well, this will be at least an honorable mention, because there's no way in hell this film's any good. And it's not. It is actually awful. I feel really bad for the girl who had to play the naughty, because it's the entire film of them treating her like garbage. And it's like, you have that geeky guy from James Cameron, the Avatar, as the main love interest, and it's like, no, I'm sorry, this is not an actor who works as a romantic lead, especially in this type of film. And then they keep talking about Paris Hilton like she's the hottest thing on the planet. She's really not. She's not even, I wouldn't even say she's attractive myself, but, you know, it's just, it's unwatchable. It's god-awful. I turned it off after about 25 minutes. It's not worth it. Don't rot your brain with this crap, kids. It's not worth it. This is my other split one, and these both have similar things, where these are also both movies that I tried to watch. I tried to watch both of these twice, and I could not get more than 20 minutes into either of them. And for similar reasons, both of them, basically because they're just insane and ugly and ugh. So the shared space for my last one will be The Forbidden Zone and Be My Teacher, aka After School Special. Forbidden Zone is this insane 1980s film that is kind of like, it's basically, to me, it's all of the bad vaudevillian acts from the 1900s shoved together into a movie. Like all the stuff that they stopped doing at 1930s because they were too racist or too ugly or too unfunny. It's the entire film is just these jokes. And it's like the film starts out with blackface for no reason. And just gets more and more insane and hard, and it's unintelligible. I cannot tell you a single thing plot-wise about this film other than, oh, family of insane weirdos live together inside a house, and below the house is a portal to another dimension called the Forbidden Zone. And that's literally all I could tell you. I know there's people that love this film. This is a cult classic for some people. I don't see it. I think it's awful. I think it's unwatchable. I could not get into it at all. But I can totally see someone making the argument for it being a great film. The other film, on the other hand, I would love to see someone defend this film to me because this film is by far the worst shot film I have ever seen. 100%. There is nothing more badly shot than this. I went on a whole rant in a couple videos ago about me hating Beyond Therapy because they took the camera and they turned it away from the actors and the plot and started filming random parts of the restaurant and what was going on around it. That was better shot than Be My Teacher was. So, Be My Teacher, the entire film is shot in a weird lens. Like, the entire thing is shot in the lens that you tend to use only for, like, dream sequences. So, basically, if you're in the dead center of the camera, like right here, you're perfectly visible and you look fine. If you're anywhere here, your face is completely fuzzy and you can't see or make out any part of their face at all. This is used primarily for dream sequence because it gives off that eerie, this isn't real, this is something odd, or maybe a memory type of thing. But if Be My Teacher, that's the entire freaking film. And it's like, ugh. Someone, like, when I went and reviewed this, I read the reviews and someone's like, this is like a Hallmark movie. And I'm like, no, it's not. Hallmark knows how to make a camera work. They know how to shoot a scene so you can see all of the actors on the screen. That was enough for me to turn it off the first time. But I'm like, okay, no, I have to see if at least something might be salvageable in this. So I tried again. And then I heard the characters talking. And my god, this is the absolute bottom worst trash acting I have ever seen. Just god awful. Like, and it's such a simple idea and a simple plot. It's just, teacher and student have relationship, things go bad. Like, anyone could make this film. This is not a hard film to kind of make. And they did everything in their power to make this the most unwatchable trash ever made. Like, I have legitimately considered putting this as my number one. But at least I could see some interest in the idea of this film anyway. Unlike my number one, which is just... Well, let's get into it. So, I watched this with the riff tracks people, and even they could not salvage how terrible and boring this film was. So this film is called Santa and the Ice Cream Bunny. This sounds like a 10-minute, 20-minute cartoon, right? That sounds like what that'd be. No, it is an hour and a half. Santa has crashed his sleigh on a beach in Florida, and the reindeer are gone. And instead of getting out and going to the nearby town, which doesn't seem that far, he summons all of the children of the town to come to him and tells them they have to find animals to pull his sleigh. And Santa just sits there on his sleigh for an hour and a half Well, an hour and 10. Because partway through the movie, you have a good 15-minute story within a story where Santa just tells these kids the story of, depending on which version you have, it's either like Thumbelina or the version I saw, which was Jack and the Beanstalk. Honestly, if the entire film was just the Jack and the Beanstalk part, it would not be in my top 5 worst. That one was okayish. It's still poorly acted. It used a really bad projection thing to make the giants appear behind them. And it's a musical with terrible singing. Not as bad as, like, Playmobil, the movie, but still terrible singing. And everyone is dressed like it's the 70s, which is weird, because it's set medieval times. But if that had been on its own, okay. It's completely random, pointless, and has nothing to do with anything. So I'm not even going to really acknowledge that as the film. So let's take that out and just look at the film itself. And it's just Santa sitting on a beach for an hour and 10 minutes. And then the last 10 minutes of the film, you see this red fire engine driving towards Santa. And driving it as a person in a giant bunny costume. That's the titular ice cream bunny. And he comes and he rescues Santa and they drive away to save Christmas. And it is terrifying. Like, the Christmas bunny design is absolutely terrifying and ugly. I just, ugh. And it's also that thing of, you walk away from this and you just go, I just spent an hour and a half of my life watching Santa sit in a sleigh on the beach. I guess I can say this about 2020. It redefined for me what a terrible, terrible, worst ever film qualifies as. Because if anyone asks me now, like, what is the worst film you've ever seen? Santa Claus and the Ice Cream Bunny is going to be one of the first things that pops out of my mouth. It's going to be up there with Dougal, Baby Geniuses 2 Super Babies, and Be My Teacher. Those are all my top 4 worst films ever made. Like, I've kind of laughed at some things that people said, like, this is the worst thing ever. Artemis Fowl is the worst thing ever. It's like, no, it's not. I've heard people say, like, Lord of the Rings is the worst film ever made, and I'm like, you have not seen enough films if you think Lord of the Rings is the worst film ever made. I'm sorry, I can get you not liking that film. I don't like 2001: A Space Odyssey, but I would never, ever say it's one of the worst things ever made. I just fall asleep during it and find it boring. But it's like, I love people that bring up these popular movies, like, Mission Impossible 2 is the worst film ever made. Like, and to be fair, that used to be my answer. But that was when I was 13. And I hadn't seen a lot. Now that I've seen Santa Claus and the Ice Cream Bunny, my life will never be the same. And I do not recommend it. Please, stay away. Don't even watch the riff tracks of it, because that is even longer. They do 3 shorts in it. And it's so much. Like, oh. I mean, I'm sorry, but if even listening to it with professional comedians riffing the entire movie does not make the film remotely watchable, then the film is terrible. There it is, my top 5 worst films that I saw in 2020. What did you all think? Have you seen worst films? Is there films that you would like me to talk a little bit more about that I just honorably mentioned? Let me know some of the films you saw in 2020, because I'm like, we've all had the time. I mean, I also watched a bunch of weird random television too. I watched my first Korean drama called Coffee Prince, which was actually fairly interesting considering I couldn't understand the language. But let me know. I found I had an Amazon Fire Stick, so I watched a lot of crap. But I also watched some good stuff, and that'll be the next one, and I'll be posting that as soon as possible if I can work myself up to talking about it. That's all for now, and I hope to see you all very soon. Bye!